share with you 3 stories that I got anonymously, that I have permission to share with you, from clients and YouTube viewers and stuff like that, about how these transits have played out, just to give you a taste for what this series is hopefully going to evolve into. So probably next week sometime, or in the upcoming weeks, I'll have more information about, once the email address is set up, you can actually email and send us your stories, and we're going to kind of archive them, and then occasionally do episodes where we just focus on maybe an archetypal combination or two that's been in the air, and some of the funny or interesting stories that correspond with that archetypal combination. Again, like, why do this? Because if you guys hear, especially if you're students of astrology, if you hear the amount of stories that I do every day and you see them in different combinations, your archetypal eye will develop, your ability to interpret will develop, your expertise potentially as a chart reader will develop. Not only that, but you'll be able to see them more in your own lives, in your own day-to-day experiences. So that's kind of the purpose of doing this. All right, so let's get into it. I'm going to pull up the real-time clock and show you what we're looking at today. I've got 3 stories from viewers about the Mars, Saturn, Uranus dynamic this week, and some of my own to share with you guys that are like just textbooks. So okay, so here it is, and I'm just going to highlight it. It's been perfecting all week. Here's Mars to Uranus perfecting over the weekend. Here's Mars to Saturn, Saturn to Uranus. It's kind of a modern astrology, we call it a T-square. So we have this very powerful dynamic going on. Now next week, Venus opposed Saturn, square Uranus. Maybe we'll tell some stories about that one. We've got Neptune coming into a square with, or Mercury coming into a square with Neptune. Maybe we'll share something about that. So that's kind of where we're heading with all of this in the next couple of weeks, hoping to gather some stories about those. In the meantime, before we have this set up, by the way, if you guys want to share stories and you're okay with me using it for this series in the next week or two, any transit that you want to share, write into the chat box of the YouTube channel or the chat comment section. Put grabbed at the front, and then put colon, and then just tell your story. And make sure that you let us know which planetary dynamic you're talking about. So you might say, I've got a good story for your grabbed series, and it's on Venus, it's on Mercury Neptune, or it's on the Mars Uranus dynamic, or whatever the case might be. So until we get this email address set up, if you guys want to just leave it in the YouTube comments, and you're okay with me sharing, I won't use your handle or name or anything, but just make sure you put grabbed or hashtag grabbed or something like that in the comments, so that we can pull stories that you're comfortable with us sharing from the comments box until we get the email.
Wow, thanks so much,
anyway,
man.
I'm super stoked about this. This idea
you chose to spend your time on me,
this
buddy?
This is the best idea,
dude.
So I'm excited.
Thanks so much, man.
Here are my stories.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm just going to share mine first,
What's
get
up,
them out of
man?
the way, and then I'll share with you 3 anonymous stories from YouTube audience and clients.
I'm gonna try to put your Arnold knowledge to work here, man.
For me this week was, and some of you know this because I posted it on the community chat section of YouTube.
Yo,
which is weird.
thanks
I didn't
so
really know
much.
they even had such a thing until I guess a couple of months ago, or maybe last year sometime. I don't remember. Anyway,
surprises how my god.
So I started some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu lessons this week.
Oh, I get it.
Yo,
thanks, man.
In the sense that I don't know if you guys know anything about this.
Sorry,
I barely know anything about it. So, and I know some people in my audience apparently, go to Jiu-Jitsu classes regularly. So I was actually really stoked to hear that.
Here we go. 1 second.
The gist of it is that in this
just
class,
came back from the gym.
Nice.
Nice, buddy.
It's kind of like a form of
I haven't worked out in a while.
Wrestling. It's a martial art. It's meant to teach you how to defend yourself.
Trying to find the right thing.
You go into class. I mean, this is at least the way that the studio works that I go to. You go into class, you learn some techniques, you practice, you drill the techniques with partners, you switch partners all the time, and at the end of class, there's a little bit of, okay, now one person is going to try to submit the other person with maybe a chokehold.
Ready to go to work at 9? Wow, what a legend, man. Subscribes, works out, goes to work.
Not get into that position. And then you flip and you do it on the other side.
Let's do a set for Bara.
You know nothing about it. There really is no other side. It's
wow, that's so
just
cool,
defending
dude.
yourself, and then when it comes to your turn, I guess, my partners have been more, I think I'm probably the only person there who's completely brand new. Or maybe there's a few other new people this week or something, but So basically, my experience this week was of doing these drills, and yeah, like the way that I would put it is getting my ass kicked by some of the nicest people I've met. I think that jujitsu, I don't know if it's the jujitsu itself or if it's just something that it's referred to, but it's called the gentle art, if I remember correctly. And I was really struck by how I was exerting a ton of energy and trying to defend myself, like whatever. And these blue belts, there was a purple belt or two that was, like kind of helping me learn, but also completely kicking my ass. And they were like like rainbow pythons, like not exerting a lot of energy, breathing a lot, and completely dominating me while I was, like basically like in more of a like amped up adrenaline, like super exerting muscle and strength mode. And I thought it was really interesting because
Dick,
it was a display of strength that
going through some
required,
stuff right now. Cannot be online for us.
It was like the least amount of effort and how did that phrase go? I'm trying.
Personal stuff. Are you serious?
Jay will know this, but it was the least amount of effort and the most safety, and yet you're submitting someone. So it's kind of like you're exerting the least amount of energy, you're doing the least amount of damage or harm, and yet you're bringing someone into submission so they can't hurt you. And like if you see videos of people, like there's great videos on the web of people like stopping a robber or something, and they'll use these techniques, and you can tell like they're not hitting the person, there's no like striking.
What's up, Bara?
They'll submit the person.
Yeah, I'll post a message from his Discord.
Oh no, and smoothly without like a crazy Hulk burst of like power and strength.
Mars, Saturn, Uranus is making a T-square this weekend, man.
I feel like my will.
We're gonna have the urge to
itself
rebel
into like a cosmic headlock this week.
We want to take action to rebel and like fight
gift. Like it was
against like
large lessons. An exercise
he's going into
in recognizing
squaring
the
like this weekend
of a particular mode of strength.
IRL.
And I think what went along with this was the recognition of.
He's been going pretty hard too, though, man.
I want to call it like active.
Like I took like the last week off, you know. Like I need to heal. Actually, I didn't take it off at all. I played. I sang down below like every day. But
when you're in like you're mounting your partner. Sounds like sexual, but you're mounting your partner, and your knees are kind of straddling them on either side, and you've got them in like a chokehold, and then they have to escape, and they're working these tactics to escape. And when I was in that position, as well as when I was watching some of the people with more experience in that position, one of the things I noticed was that they're in this like very weakened, sort of submissive position, and yet they were constantly active in it, like constantly, slowly, subtly manipulating and moving out of it. And it made me realize that it's like, I think that there's this false dichotomy that we have sometimes. This is all very Mars, Saturn, Uranus, and I'll link it back in a second. It's like this false dichotomy we have between like, dominance and submission. Like dominance is on top, and if you submit, you're weak and oppressed and on the bottom. And like that's one expression of the relationship between, let's say, yang and yin. But what I was seeing in this class was that there's a way in which the yang,
I don't know, I got one for my birthday.
Weak. Because every time that I tried to step into like really exerting strength, dominance, yang energy, what I noticed was that the subtler, slower, seemingly more submissive or passive position that the other person was in was almost always stronger than me, and would end up, completely flipping the table. So if you think about that yin-yang dynamic, there's a little speck of white in the dark, and there's a little speck of dark in the white. And I kept thinking about that, and thinking about how even though something appears like it's still, or it's passive, or it's in a more submissive position, that there's still always activity happening in that space. And eventually from that space, there's, the action moves, and the tables are flipped. And I want to say that it was, as a as a man, it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced, honestly. I'm not saying that I learned a lot of jiu-jitsu this league, but I feel like I learned something important about like active passivity, and the way in which strength comes through something that seemingly looks a lot more passive or submissive, in the way that there's still always activity in that space. And learning how to find strength in that active passivity is very similar to bhakti yoga, for example, where the standard, like the gold standard of spiritual life, is being in kind of an actively, deliberately surrendered position, but finding action in that space, finding meaningful activity and movement in that space of surrenderedness.
Did the job right.
And I feel like that was a huge breakthrough for me this week, because relate it back to the astrology.
I have no
sort of masculine piece of myself, what I was really unconscious of. It's like, I feel like it's very deeply unconscious for all of us. It doesn't really matter if you're a man or a woman, because there was plenty of women in this class, and I'm sure they were realizing the same thing, or had at some point in their journey with this. Is that, okay, here's Mars running up against Saturn. Exert your will, blocked. Get your arm in an arm lock. Get choked out, or whatever the case might be in these moves. And again, the people were doing this in ways that were very, like, they were not crazy intense, like dominant. I wasn't like dealing with like jocked out steroid like hulks. It was, I mean, I was watching women who were much smaller than me in this class doing this to men. So at any rate, the will runs up against the limit, Saturn. And then by running up against that limit over and over and realizing, oh, there's a different way of using this Mars energy. There's a little speck of white in the dark of the yin. For example, I'd say my biggest breakthrough of the week was last night, when I realized that I had defended myself about 5 or 10 seconds longer than I was capable of doing at the beginning of the week. And I heard a friend of mine tell me that, like, you should like look for little things like that, because in the beginning, when you know nothing, it can feel like you're just kind of getting beat up by the whole thing. But being able to like defend myself, I was on the bottom, so I was in a submissive position, and I realized that I just needed to breathe, and I needed to not do anything, and I needed to just kind of just be more aware of like little subtle things that my partner was doing and starting to set up. This did not last long. I ended up in a headlock, so it didn't last long at all. But it was something to learn how to be active in a passive position.
Hundreds, wow.
And like, I read this study online somewhere that, and this was maybe years ago now, that said that generally speaking, one of the reasons that women are more dissatisfied in their intimacy with their partner is because they don't often get to be as in the dominant position with men, because weirdly, men's stamina, sexually speaking, goes down when they're in the submissive position. And I'd always thought that was really interesting, because I mean, at least for me and some of my close friends that I talked to about this, like, I think that holds true for a lot of men, that men may find that their stamina is better as long as they're kind of in control and guiding things in a sexual experience. But I think that, like, one thing that I was just thinking about in this the jiu-jitsu experience is starting to sound really sexual, sorry guys. But one of the things that I was thinking about is just how men don't often, maybe anybody doesn't get the opportunity to learn how to develop kind of active strength within a submissive place.
No.
And submissive, it sounds like a
$230. No way, man.
Place, really. So anyway,
no
for
way.
Me, the point is that this was like a major breakthrough.
That's way too much money, man.
This week, like, I can't think of a time.
It's up to you, though. That's what I mean. Like,
where something about
you might, like, I'm gonna recommend buy the cheapest, not cheapest blender, but a safe, cheap blender, like a Black & Decker or something, maybe.
Okay, so here's the funny thing about this.
I don't know.
When I had that, like,
that's way too expensive.
Place of hitting this wall the very first night and second night that I went. I felt like really frustrated, and
I don't want to be a hater.
Like, I'm definitely not over that. I'm sure there's a lot more to come. But interesting thing about it is that, so right after the second experience of just being in that space of like still, I feel like one of the small lessons I learned, and this has only been a week, so I'm sure there'll be repeated
Yo,
occurrences
thanks
of
for being
this,
here,
but
Bart. Thanks
it
for
was
stopping
like,
dude with the
you
prime.
can't,
Thanks for being here, Dick, man. Appreciate it, dudes.
don't try to exert too much strength here, because your strength isn't really what's going to do the trick in jujitsu. Like, you just raw muscle, it's just not going to work. And I felt really frustrated by that and sort of broken down and beat up about it, honestly. And I woke up in the morning
So
after the
representative
jiu-jitsu
of
class, and for 4 hours, my body
me going
decided
after
it was
Aztec.
time to process another little kidney stone. So some of you guys who follow my channel
Oh
know
my god.
that
No, it's not like me.
a couple of years ago I had a kidney stone. It was a really big deal. So that one, I had to go to the hospital, and but this was really, thankfully, it was small and not, it could have been worse. It was like about 4 hours, and then it was over. And the whole time the kidney stone was passing, I felt it psychologically connected to, it was like purging this very limited idea of what strength and toughness is about. And it was so healing. I can't, I just, there's nothing else to say like that. And so that was like my breakthrough week. Okay, so then this is funny because I had forgotten that I had also scheduled a chiropractor appointment this week. I have these jujitsu lessons. I have a little 4-hour, very small but painful kidney stone, and I've been, well, I'll go into that some other time. But then I have this appointment at the chiropractor. So I go into the chiropractor, and I've never been to a chiropractor before, but he decided, because I'm at my desk a lot, and I just want to take care of my body, and I've always just like had some advice from another friend of mine who sees a chiropractor, like, go check out a chiropractor, like maybe they could help you. So it's like, especially just neck back stuff sitting at the desk. I'm sure some of you guys experienced that. Anyway, so I go to chiropractor, and had some bodily manipulation done. They do some popping and cracking and manipulating your spine and stuff like that. And I have to say that was also, such a Mars, Saturn, Uranus moment where my physical skeleton is being manipulated. They're taking x-rays, and she's showing me and kind of, helping me explain some things that I can do at home and stuff like that. But that moment of like having my neck and back and hearing it pop. And I was sitting there, and I said, all of a sudden I go, oh my God, this is so Mars, Saturn, Uranus. It's like a physical, sudden sort of violent shift of structure, reorganizing of structural structural integration changes. And so that's my second one. Finally, we had someone working on something in our offices here, and they ended up damaging the wall. So we had to have the wall repaired. So there was structural damage to a wall in our house from a contractor. Also, so my two daughters had some big breakthroughs in their swimming classes. So they were both really scared of
I think I lost some mass.
classes. And my one daughter was able to
all that Aztec
and go underneath the water with her head, and for they count, they do like 1 monkey, 2 monkey, or something like that, I don't know. So anyway, she was able to go underwater. My other daughter, my youngest one, who was too scared to even get in the pool, got in the pool. And both of them happened on the same day, right after Mars had passed over Saturn. And they were like elated that they had this breakthrough in their physical bodies, that they had gotten past fears, that they had faced them. I was like, this is so Mars, Uranus, Saturn. Then later in the day, they were playing, and my one daughter got angry. My younger daughter, my 3-year-old, got angry at my 5.5-year-old, Summer and Gigi. And Summer slammed the door and caught my daughter Gigi's fingers in it. So my daughter Gigi's thumb was totally swollen. It was awful. So there was a sudden violent injury after their breakthroughs in the swimming pool. Okay, and then finally, last but not least, I realized that this was such a weird thing to come up to realize, but I had this realization where I was like, I chant every day, and I there's a certain set number of rounds that we do every day in the Bhakti tradition. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna get a cylinder,
Have to head out
like a
today?
big cylinder vase, and I'm going to get some of those little marbles, like
Nice,
these
man.
little small marbles, and I'm going to start filling the vase with the
Do it, buddy.
marbles based on every day that I do my rounds. I'm going to put it in there, because one of the things that I heard a guru talk about is that it can be a good thing to have some sense of the numerical commitment that your life has taken on, right? So it's not about numbers, obviously. It's about the quality of your chanting. It's about your consciousness. But when you feel like it's hard to keep up with your commitment, or not that it's hard, but that it's you lack motivation, or you don't like doing it, or something like that. So you need, sometimes you need ways of standing back and appreciating how far you've come and how many good things have come out of your discipline on days or stretches where you feel a little plateaued. So I came up with this idea of, getting a little vase and putting little marbles in it for, each day that I finish my rounds, and I'm going to fill it with those number that I've already chanted. So I would just get a visual picture of how many days of my life I've given to chanting. And I was realizing that this was going to help me have a breakthrough from the feeling of monotony that's crept into my practice. And I was like, that is so Mars, Uranus, Saturn, isn't it? The monotony, Mars, Saturn, of a discipline, Mars, Saturn, and the needing to kind of have a breakthrough from a plateau and coming up with something that can help you kind of remotivate you. And then I realized the only way that I'm going to survive, I think, if I don't know how long I'll last doing this jiu-jitsu, but I'm going to do the same thing in a little separate base.
Did I find a place for the equipment?
Each class that I go to in jiu-jitsu.
What equipment,
because I can tell you right now that one of the things that I find most overwhelming about doing this is just it's just really hard to go do something where you get your butt kicked every single night, and
the extra weights.
So I had a friend tell me, well, just
no, I did not find a guy selling dumbbells from the back of a truck.
I can drop some marbles into this thing, and maybe I'll last.
I say a lot of things. I also say I'm going to get Aztec sub 146.
3 years, maybe. Who knows? But just as a way
I'm joking. I'm going to go back for that.
Not coming home feeling completely
very soon, probably
destroyed.
Tomorrow.
I'll put a little marble in the space for every class that I go to. And those two ideas.
No, not yet, man. I gotta get them.
In a moment where I was feeling just a little bit defeated and tired in my disciplines, and not that the jiu-jitsu thing's new, but just needing this way of
what's it called? Yeah, I need to get the 50s.
The feeling of monotony or
it'll be good for the flies too.
Or anticipating how do I deal with that regularly, because that's a part of any discipline. You could easily say the same thing for astrology, So if you're just studying every day, or if you're practicing a sport every day, or working out, or something like that, it's like we need, our psyches need little ways of appreciating the beauty of our commitment. So I was like, I'm going to get some really beautiful, and they're not just marbles too, I'm going to get something really beautiful. I don't know, maybe I'll get those little cool, like sort of rainbow looking little glass beads or something. But something that I can look at and go, look at the beauty of your commitment on days where, I feel like it's not amounting to anything, or I feel overwhelmed by it. So those were some of the things that came up for me this week. Those are my grab stories for you. Now, in future episodes, I certainly don't want my stories to just
it's what you know and what you can share with the world.
Maybe I'll share a story or two, but then really highlight your stories, because I want you guys to see how many different diverse stories
I got this fortune cookie, and this has inspired me so much, even with streaming and everything.
With these transits. I know that if I didn't know astrology this week, I think I would have.
It says talents that are not shared are not talents.
The consequences of these transits could have been a lot more extreme. So here's some stories, 3 that I'll leave you with really quickly. That are, they're brief. So in the future, hopefully, we'll have people kind of write things out, and I'll be able to fully read them to you. But here are 3 stories from you guys that also reflect the Mars, Saturn, Uranus dynamic. A woman wrote to me saying that her boss became suddenly very rigid, very authoritarian, exerting a ton of machismo, and she was like, he's being grabbed by the transits right now. It must be striking his natal chart in a particularly difficult way. And she felt herself wanting to engage in a power struggle, and because of the
Ford told me more of my repairs current recall.
Commitment to
wow, that's amazing, buddy. That's sick, buddy.
I'm going to step back, and good, I'm not going to respond. I'm going to be in a position of humility and patience for now, and we're going to revisit this next week after these transits pick up. Yay! That's the way to do it, right? You understand the transits, you understand someone might be getting grabbed around you, and so you just step back. When you do that, you're waving a little flag to the universe, being like, I'm here, I have a will,
that's amazing.
I'm conscious,
That's huge.
I see the gods. The universe, really in my experience, the cosmos, the powers of the cosmos start to respect you more, and they start to consider your will, and you're less likely to just get pulled along unconsciously. So congratulations, what a great day in your life. Second one, someone wrote to me about a jet ski collision that they witnessed on the lake that they were out boating, and this is here in Minnesota. And that they were out on the lake and they witnessed a jet ski collision. Thankfully, it wasn't high speed, so it was pretty low speed. But a jet ski was coming in, wasn't really paying attention, and ran into a docked boat, and tore up the boat in the jet ski pretty badly. And thankfully was not injured badly, but said, I couldn't believe that I saw this this extreme Mars-Saturn accident where there was a major collision right in front of where they were, right by where
you to get the charger. Oh yeah,
it could have been a lot worse, if they were going fast or whatever, or faster. But they saw this major collision on a lake right as Mars, Saturn, and Uranus were perfecting. So just observing it and going, wow, there it is. If you see it like that, it really helps you to start to feel the planets in your body. So congrats for noticing that. I mean, it's just a big deal to be able to have that wherewithal to say, oh, there's the archetype. So finally, I have someone who wrote into me saying that they are not a violent person. They have not a violent bone in their body, so to speak, and that they got so mad this week that they punched a wall and sprained their wrist. And they were like, I'm not violent, I don't lash out, I don't get into conflicts or confrontations, I've never been in a fight, and that somehow they got so angry that they ended up punching a wall and spraining their wrist. And then they realized right away, there's Mars, Saturn, Uranus. So were you able to catch it before you hit the wall? No, but were you able to recognize it afterwards and say, look at what just grabbed me? Yes, and that still matters, because even being able to address or identify what happened to you afterward, that's hugely important, because being able to identify, even in hindsight, is going to increase your awareness.
Imagine punching a wall
comes around. So,
and then blaming it on planets far away.
All right, so that is it for this kind of first episode.
Oh, I guess it must have been Saturn and Uranus.
I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I would love to hear your stories. Just make sure you put #grabbed or grabbed : tell the story in the chat box. Please don't email us. We're going to have a separate email address set up for just this particular series. If you want to have your story shared with a larger audience, we'd really love it. And I look forward to hopefully gathering more stories from you guys over the weeks to come. All right, that's what I've got for today. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, exactly.
Astrology, and today we are going to take a look at your rising sign horoscopes for the month of July 2021. I'm going to walk you through what the transits are, what dates they're happening for everybody, and then we'll start walking it through each individual sign. Now, given that there are a number of there's kind of two different T-squares going on this month, meaning 3 different planets and 3 different signs perfecting. That means that we have multiple house topics being activated at different times. So what I'm doing is throwing out a lot of different topics that can get activated when those houses are activated with these transits. The idea for you is, if you're listening, is to just listen and get your bearings. Okay, these different topics are being activated, and then you can see, if you just think a little bit about the sort of karmic fault lines in your life right now, you get a feeling for where those events are most likely to occur. So that's what we're doing, and as always, I love hearing your stories. I love hearing, how these transits end up landing in your life. So, feel free to Leave me your stories in the chat box. I always like hearing from you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put the chart up on screen. I'm going to walk you through the transits first, give you the dates, and then I'll walk through how they're applying for all 12 signs without repeating the dates every single time. So here is the here are the transits that are perfecting. July 1st, you're going to see Mars opposite Saturn. And then by the 3rd, you're going to see Mars square to Uranus. Okay, so the 1st and the 3rd, you get Mars opposite Saturn, Mars square Uranus. I'm going to talk about that for all 12 signs. On the 6th, we're going to see Mercury's final square to Neptune, which I will only be talking about for the mutable signs because it will land in your angular houses. Then for on the 6th, especially the fixed signs, you fixed signs out there, fixed rising signs are getting a ton of action this month. That would be Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. Here's Venus opposing Saturn on July 6th, and then you'll see Venus squared to Uranus on the 8th. Venus is squared to Uranus on the 8th. And then the kind of a nice grand finale, you'll see Venus and Mars get together in a conjunction after all of this on the 13th, kind of potentially bringing some resolution if there has been conflict in different areas of your life. So that's kind of good news for everybody. Especially I'll be talking about my Leo and Aquarius risings. But at any rate, finally on the 17th, the Sun will oppose Pluto. So we're walking through about the 17th of the month. Now, the reason I'm not going beyond that is because this is where the main action of the month is. The transits beyond there are not as potent, in my opinion. And I will be doing a few videos walking through the rising signs, for example, when Jupiter returns to Aquarius by retrograde. So later in the month, I'll be doing some refresh on all 12 signs for people. So the first half of the month is really where the focus is at. We're going to begin with Aries. So if you're an Aries rising,
dude, it's so great the dog is back streaming, man.
These transits are falling across 3 houses where you could see conflict and then eventual resolution by the 13th when Venus and Mars get together. Now, the reason I say conflict first is both of these planets have to go through the opposition and square to Uranus, and then they can join. You always want to focus on the place where the faster moving planets are located, because as they're aspecting these slower moving planets, they tend to bring the action into the house that they're located in. So for Aries individuals this month, Venus and Mars are located in your 5th house. This is kind of like the anchor point. And the Venus-Mars 5th house dynamic has a lot to do with romance, sexuality, children, pregnancy, as well as anything that brings joy, pleasure, or happiness. For example, creativity, the arts, going out to restaurants for the first time, or getting together with friends and you don't have to wear your masks, or whatever the case might be. So, or just working on a creative
so good
project,
to work out again,
doing
man.
something that brings joy, that's new and exciting. Well, when you see Mars and Venus going through these dynamics with Saturn and Uranus, the first thing that comes to my mind is, what is blocking you from feeling good right now? Whether it's in your relationships or your love life, or whether it's with your children, or whether it's something to do with a creative project that you're working on. Just where is your joy feeling prohibited, or where are you feeling inhibited? And how are you working through that this month? This strikes me as the most important thing for Aries individuals, Aries rising. Now, if you're looking at the opposition to Saturn in the 11th, part of the stress is coming from groups of people or organizations or friends or social dynamics or allies, or something about the social dimension of your life might be part of the challenge. At the same time,
when you work out, you gotta put on the Spochi song.
The desire for change, growth, and a bit of a revolution around money and finances. Anything to do with assets, resources, investments, that's going to be Uranus in the 2nd. So pressures from the house of friends, groups, allies, as kind of your social house, as well as the place of money, resources, finances, business. There's pressures coming in there from those areas that relate back to this house that has to do with pleasure, joy, fun, again, children, sex, romance, And so that's kind of the conglomeration of energies that we're seeing. Whatever the tension is, the opportunity for some kind of synthesis or harmonization is there by the 13th. Okay, so that's the T-square energy in your succedent houses 11, 2, and 5, with an emphasis on house 5, which was traditionally called the joy of Venus and a house of pleasure. So anything related to joy, pleasure, happiness, whether it's sensual or creative, or again the topics of children and pregnancy. Now,
it's too long.
We're going to go through a few others. So on the 6th of the month, remember that there's also going to be an applying square between Mercury and Neptune. In the midst of all of this, there could be some confusing communication patterns or some unclear boundaries mentally or verbally, as well as, watching for non-ordinary or very intuitive states of mind or consciousness to play a role in the first half of the month because of Mercury going into the square to Neptune from the 3rd house, which is a place of communication and mind. So watch for that in the midst of all of this. Then finally on the 17th, we see the Sun moving through an opposition with Pluto from the 4th to the 10th. I like that as a real moment. Again, if we anchor the transiting planet down in the 4th, change, transformation, growth relative to home and family or living environment or roots, but with some kind of connection to the career house. So I like that as a very powerful, very quick but powerful transit right around the 17th of the month. So that's, if you're an Aries rising, that's how I'm seeing it play out. All right, so let's move forward to Taurus rising. Now, if you're a fixed sign this month, these transits that I've been talking about already throughout for Aries and already at the very beginning of the video, these series of T-squares, if you're a fixed sign like Taurus, or Leo, or Scorpio, or Aquarius, these energies are a lot more potent because they're falling into your angular houses. So it's a really good idea to understand where the focus of that is. For you right now, the focus is in the 4th house, which is home, family, living environment.
All right, I'll put it on.
I'm a Taurus rising, and this month, excuse me, we have a little bit of work being done here at our new house, and we're still, moving in, and as you guys know, it takes a while to move in, but we have some fixer-upper type of things that we're doing. Contractors that'll be in and out. We're going to visit family. We have family coming into town to visit. It's my 40th birthday. So a lot of emphasis around home and family this month. Now, I know, because I'm an astrologer, that this means that there could be a little bit of tension. Why? Because there's going to be some stress coming from the workplace for me simultaneously. Got Saturn opposing in the 10th, and the need to be free or to change or transform personally, physically, that's going to be there as well.
I remember you sent me this before, and I listened to it before, but I forgot that this was a song.
Some days I sit staring out the window, watching this world pass me by.
This is not his song.
Sometimes I think there's nothing to live for. I almost break down and cry. Sometimes I think I'm crazy, oh so crazy. Why am I here? Am I just wasting my time?
Alright, for Spochi, here we go, for Spochi. Oh, this is a song.
Come on! Sometimes I think I'm crazy.
Focus! Focus! Hot! Hot!
I keep singing this song to my daughter. If I can hit the notes, I blow something as long as my father. Show her how I feel about it. How proud I am that I got a kind of a daddy. I'm so glad that I'm out here. I could probably get this picture from my public persona. The dime, a pistol back and drug addict who bags on his mama. But I want to just take this time out to be perfectly honest. Cause there's a lot of shit I keep bottled that hurts deep inside of my soul. And just know that I grow colder the older I grow. Just hold it.
Don't forget your number. Oh yeah.
But I gotta work this determined to make my life live hell. Handle it well, given the circumstances I'm dealt. So many chances, man, it's too bad. Could've had something else. Sometimes it feels like the world's on my shoulders. Everyone's leaning on me. But sometimes it feels like the world's almost over. But then she comes back to
It's Fochi.
Sometimes I think I'm crazy.
Yo, the famous Dickiscon in chat. 30,000 Instagram views on his upside down friggin' 2-finger friggin' handstand push-ups. Insane. Exponential growth, man. Exponential growth. You're just gonna go. You're already fucking here. You go. That's sick, man. You have good stuff. Oh yes, yes. This is such a good song. This is such a good song.
You have one shot on stage, what you got to play? Generic drops for days, still the people rage. Am I not insane? Can you stop and explain why these drops are so lame? Is money buying your fame? I'm fucking on, I'm killing it with this song. You haters can sing along or go back where you belong. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with giving up, moving on. Cause I took your girl to prom, she can't help but sing this song.
Comes on till the lights go out, till my legs give out. Can't shut my mouth till the smoke clears out. And my high ass, I'ma rip this shit till my bones collapse. Till the roof comes on, till the lights go out, till my legs give out. Can't shut my mouth till the smoke clears out. And my high ass, I'ma rip this shit till my bones collapse.
Oh, it's a remix, but whatever. Alright, enough of this. Enough of this.
I'm so gone, faded off the 30 rack. She's so gone like a light switch, flirted back.
Well, for example, some of you guys know I shared that I just decided to start taking some jiu-jitsu lessons this past week. And I'm of course all jazzed about that right now. I'm really loving it. It's really fun. And you know, so the pressure to want to do that, to exert myself physically, to be involved in that, while there's also perhaps mounting pressures at, you know, work, new classes starting, and a speaker series in July that I'm hosting, and then let's say stuff going on at home. So you can just kind of feel those three areas.
my video on the 12,000-year-old site of Göbekli Tepe, a truly ancient megalithic complex that has caused archaeologists to rethink their narrative of so-called primitive post-Ice Age civilizations. Göbekli Tepe displays ancient knowledge of construction, astronomy, art and agriculture, and even though it was discovered more than 20 years ago, we still don't know a great deal about this enigmatic site, which, I should add, is the size of 13 full-size football pitches and is still largely unexcavated. The sophistication of a society that could build such magnificent monuments, which include ornately carved pillars of stone weighing 45 to 65 tons, far surpasses what most experts thought was possible during that period. Many have theorized about the purpose of the site, and you can search the internet to find a number of theories, but there isn't a great deal known about the identity of the builders. Then I came across a theory put forward by researcher and author Bruce Fenton, who presents the hypothesis that Göbekli Tepe was in fact built by Aboriginal Australians. Such an idea will make most people roll their eyes, but Fenton has noticed startling similarities between the carvings and reliefs at Göbekli Tepe and the cave paintings of Arnhem Land in northern Australia, and they just can't be ignored. For example, on the edge of one of the large pillars at Göbekli Tepe, we find this unusual symbol, which nobody has yet been able to decipher. But Fenton recognised it as one that certain Australian Aboriginal elders hold dear and often paint on their chest. It is said to depict two people sitting to share knowledge. But there's more. On another pillar, Fenton has identified a symbol usually reserved for the most sacred artefacts of Australian Aboriginal culture, known as Chewinga stones. He has also found what he believes are Chewinga stones at other 12,000-year-old sites in Turkey that display concentric circles characteristically used by Aboriginal Australians to depict watering holes, and zigzag lines used to depict waterways. Furthermore, Fenton interprets many of the animal symbols on the stones as Aboriginal Australian clan totems, and the symbolic bag symbol appears in both locations as well, as do similar depictions of the Mother Goddess, seen here at Göbekli Tepe, which looks very similar to this ancient Aboriginal depiction of the Mother Goddess known as Yingana. The likeness between the two images is striking. Yingana is a female humanoid personification of the rainbow serpent, one of the most powerful entities in Aboriginal mythology. Even the shape.
Garbage video. Absolute garbage video. Pardon me.
Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. Just when you all thought I was becoming mainstream Matt, I come out with a video title like this. Okay, let me just say, I always try to follow the evidence, I question everything, mainstream and alternative, and I'm willing to accept a complete mainstream opinion if I can't disprove it or there's no better alternative, or simply if that's where the evidence points to, however unpopular that may be. I found Robert Schoch's interpretation of the Sphinx enclosure far from conclusive. Both the geophysical work and the geological interpretation of the erosion on the enclosure walls. Many independent geologists also disagree with Schoch. Jean-Pierre Houdin's work on the dating of the erosion, using the topography of Gyges and detailed computer models and associated diagrams, together with supporting views from a number of independent geologists, also seem definitive. I followed the evidence and could not disprove the very logical and scientific work by Houdin, and I spent all of Christmas trying to figure it out. It was actually annoying me, because I was working on my own hypothesis that the origins of the Sphinx may date back to the late pre-dynastic period. Before Christmas, the end result of my research was that the so-called surface runoff erosion on the Sphinx enclosure must be dynastic in age, because to get the pattern we see, it had to come after the pyramid quarries were dug and also after the Caffrey Causeway was built. For reference, I'll keep up the video I made, because this channel really is about charting my own journey and learning, and I think that that's important. For me personally, that conclusion really was a huge anticlimax, because although I didn't believe the Sphinx was 10,000 years old, I did think it was late pre-dynastic or early dynastic in origin. But now I can happily admit I was wrong. Well, not really me, but it appears that Jean-Pierre Houdin was wrong, because I received a very welcomed email from geologist Colin Reeder, who could provide the hard evidence to say the runoff erosion on the Sphinx enclosure could only have happened before the 4th Dynasty pyramids were built. And in this video, I'm going to explain everything. First of all, I have huge respect for Colin Reeder for taking the time to send me diagrams, papers and detailed information to help me understand his work on the Sphinx. He was extremely helpful, and his work really should be far better known. He really is a pioneer in the study of ancient Giza, and it was a real pleasure to discuss the subject with him. At this stage, I'll just say that I am aware that this is a YouTube video and not a scientific journal, so I'll try and keep the information at a level that a broad audience with different backgrounds can understand. Colin Reeder's most recent paper was in response to Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner, and specifically their 2017 book Giza and the Pyramids, where the two authors openly criticise and refute Reeder's work, which claims that the Sphinx is an early dynastic monument, built before the reigns of Khufu, Khafre and Menkaure. Firstly, Reeder doesn't deny the Sphinx enclosure and the monument itself has been affected by a number of weathering and erosional processes such as wind erosion, chemical weathering, daily heating and cooling of the limestone members, salt exfoliation and so on. Every geological process plays a role in degrading the Sphinx. It's not as straightforward as wind and water erosion. Although some people deny it, Reeder and also Robert Schock point out clear signs of surface runoff erosion on the western third of the southern enclosure wall and also on the western enclosure wall. Here the degradation of the limestone is most intense, with rounded, heavily degraded exposures of the soft member 2 limestone. Jean-Pierre Houdin produced this topographical map that showed the direction of surface runoff at Giza if no pyramids or causeways were built and no quarries were dug, which indicated that if the Sphinx did come first, there should be no erosion on the southern enclosure wall and the western wall should not show the uniform erosion as it does. This all seemed fair, scientific and logical, and I could not disprove it. But Colin Reeder can, and it is from the concept of a flow net, which models the way in which the natural topography, if unaltered by quarries and pyramids, would have influenced surface water or groundwater in the vicinity of the Sphinx. And well, here it is, and Reeder uses a more detailed topographic map of the locality. This really is one of those diagrams you could hold up in an Egyptology conference and then just drop the microphone. Because the natural water flow pretty much matches the erosional patterns on the Sphinx enclosure. As you can see, it's quite precise. The spacing of the blue lines indicates the relative intensity of the resulting flow, and it takes into account the general slope of the Giza Plateau and the local variations around the Sphinx enclosure itself. The flow lines are closer together on the western wall, indicating that this is where the bulk of the erosion should take place, just as we see in real life. The absence of flow lines on the eastern end of the southern enclosure wall suggests that only low intensity flows would reach this area, which is why the enclosure looks more intact. Flow lines do intersect with the western half of the southern wall, meaning that runoff erosion should increase the further west you go. Again, exactly what we see in real life. Runoff has played a role in the erosion of the Sphinx enclosure. The deeply exaggerated vertical fissures and rounded beds show this, and based on the flow net created by Reader, it appears to have happened before the pyramids were built. This was all fantastic, but I still had a few questions. What about the drainage channel that runs into the southwestern corner of the Sphinx enclosure? And what about the idea from Jean-Pierre Houdin that the quarries also channeled water uniformly onto the western wall? Could the erosion also be explained in the dynastic era? These are good questions, but ones that Reader could answer quite easily. The quarries immediately to the west of the Sphinx would not have directed the flow of water, they would have acted like a reservoir, and there is science and even an eyewitness account to back this up. The quarry is located around 20 metres to the west, upslope of the Sphinx. Before the quarrying, runoff from occasional rainstorms was able to discharge into the Sphinx enclosure, scouring the western walls and creating the intense degradation that we see. Once the quarrying began, runoff from the west and northwest would have been directed into the quarries. It would not have been able to reach the downslope areas in which the Sphinx enclosure lies, as the quarries were more like basins, not this shape proposed by Houdin. There was higher ground between the quarries and the Sphinx enclosure. Furthermore, even if rainfall was sufficient enough to spill over the eastern side of the quarry basin, the runoff would not form a uniform pattern of erosion on the western wall. And another thing, although rainstorms did occur in dynastic history, they were far more frequent in the late pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods, and less common in the Old Kingdom. Although storms were devastating, Reader suggests that even if there was no quarrying in the Old Kingdom, there would not have been sufficient rainfall to create the intense erosional patterns we see. I stated in my last video on the Sphinx erosion that in the 1990s, an Egyptologist saw a torrent of water flow directly into the Sphinx enclosure during a rainstorm, and that this is evidence that the quarries did not stop the Gyges surface runoff from reaching the Sphinx enclosure. But Reader counters this by explaining the modern changes to the landscape of Giza. Many areas have been cleared of sand. A modern asphalt road has been built immediately to the north of the Sphinx enclosure. A masonry wall has been built along the western and northern limits, and surrounding areas have been subject to extensive archaeological excavation, redistributing large amounts of sand and accumulated debris. The hydrological conditions at Giza today are so different to any part of dynastic history, so observing surface water flow in the modern era has no bearing on how it acted thousands of years ago. Reader then discusses an eyewitness account by Carl Lepsius, where he described a severe rainfall event at Giza in 1843. It is an important account because it largely predates the modern interventions that influence the current hydrological conditions. In 1843, conditions would not have been that much different from those that prevailed throughout the preceding centuries or even millennia. So, what does Lepsius say? He describes a brief but severe rainstorm that led to the development of high-energy runoff capable of washing away tents and equipment, including iron crowbars. Yes, storms at Giza can be that intense. But despite the ferocity, within a short distance of washing through the camp, the water formed a lake in a hollow behind the
Dude,
Sphinx.
that takes skill, man. I tried doing it for
Lepsius
like
even
3,
said
4,
that the
and
lake
I ran
had
out of
no
breath.
outlets, indicating that this runoff failed to
I'm
reach
such
the
at my
Sphinx
max
enclosure.
level of like
The severe
oxygen
storm
to
caused
muscle
no damage
use
to
is
the
crazy.
monument.
It's like it's
The
surprising.
hollow described
I
by
can't even
Lepsius can only be the
talk and I can
quarry
only breathe.
originally
It's
worked
crazy.
by Khufu. And yes, they were quarried during the reign of Khufu, as there are mud seal impressions bearing Khufu's name inside the quarry,
he's doing heavy weights,
indicating
though.
that these quarries were there before Khafre. Remember, although some geologists do disagree,
like in
Colin
karate
Reader,
and
like
martial
Robert
arts,
Schoch,
like,
is
your
convinced that
ki,
the only way for the
yeah,
natural
you, like,
joints on the western
it's like pretty much
enclosure
screaming.
wall to become so deeply
know.
scoured and the bed so heavily rounded is from high-energy water runoff, which we now know
I don't
could
know if they
not
do that in
happen
Chinese.
after
I
the
know they do that
pyramids were
in
built.
karate.
Lena and Hawass still say the degradation of the Sphinx could be done in dynastic
Mind-muscle
history,
connection.
and that it would not take a great deal of time. But Reader points out the 26th dynasty tombs that are cut into the western enclosure wall and are still so fresh that ancient tool marks are still seen, showing that in the last 2,000 or so years, the so-called salt and chemical weathering processes, as well as low energy runoff, have not been intense enough to sufficiently erode the limestone of the Sphinx enclosure. It hasn't even removed the ancient tool marks. This shows that another ancient process did affect the western enclosure wall to erode it, and this can only be the high energy water runoff. And as Reader has shown, such runoff had to have occurred before the pyramids were built. But all this still means that the bedrock ramp or roadway beneath the Caffrey Causeway does predate the Sphinx enclosure, because it forms the southern enclosure wall. It was quarried right up to it. Reader has no problem with this, as he explains there is evidence of activity at Gyges going as far back as the late pre-dynastic, to the Madi culture, which I'll be discussing in a future video. Reader believes the bedrock path below the Caffrey Causeway could well have been an ancient early dynastic ceremonial walkway or road of some kind, reused by Caffrey in the 4th dynasty to build his causeway. As I explained in a recent video, there is a trench that is dug into the northern side of the causeway, which Houdan says channeled water into the Sphinx enclosure. But all this means is that runoff erosion would continue into dynastic history, taking water into the enclosure, causing even more erosion at the southwestern corner of the enclosure. But, offering a different view, Reader says there is no consensus on the function of the ditch. Yes, it could be for drainage by design or by default, but it could also have been a boundary marker. If it is a drainage channel by design,
we need to
why
make a
didn't
pyramid,
Caffrey
Dick.
just drain the waters into the quarries to the north and south of the causeway? Why deliberately channel the waters into the Sphinx enclosure? The only rainwater runoff that this channel would direct is that from the western end of the causeway, so the waters could have easily been directed into the quarries protecting the Sphinx if Caffrey's architects chose to do this. There is even more supporting evidence that Reader produces for a pre-4th dynasty Sphinx, including a less weathered 4th dynasty cutting into more deeply weathered Member 1 limestone on the Sphinx enclosure's northern wall, proving that the eroded enclosure predates the Pyramid Age. There is also the recutting of the top of the Caffrey Causeway, truncating the deep runoff erosion fissures that came before and that we can see continue onto the southern enclosure wall. The flow diagram using the original Gyges topography is the hard scientific evidence I was personally looking for, and together with the eyewitness account of the lake that formed in the quarry and the lack of surface runoff coming out of it, as well as the lack of logic in creating a water channel to erode the Sphinx enclosure, well,
but this time I'll be streaming it.
The Sphinx does predate the pyramids of Egypt, and therefore, by default, so does the first phase of the Sphinx temple. The bedrock walkway beneath the Caffrey Causeway also predates the pyramids, and as Reader also speculates, it is likely that the megalithic proto-mortuary temple at the western end of the causeway does as well, the place where the causeway leads to. Some even speculate there was an earlier structure beneath the Caffrey Pyramid, and I have shown in previous videos how it could have been enlarged.
Oh, it's amazing. Like, if you write a book, you can be remembered forever. Like, look at Plato, look at Da Vinci, look at Einstein.
But I am now without doubt that there was activity on the Giza Plateau before.
You know?
The earliest archaeological finds at Gyges are 4 well-preserved jars from the late pre-dynastic Madi culture, apparently found in the 1800s at the foot of the Great Pyramid, which experts believe were funerary in origin and not indicative of a settlement.
As previous
Therefore, Gyges could have been a more ancient necropolis and ritual landscape way before the 4th dynasty, as I alluded to many months ago. I am still working on my idea that the original Proto-Sphinx is this image on the Norma palette, which is said to represent the Horus kings from the south conquering the people of the Delta, the northern Madi culture. But is this really just a hieroglyphic depiction of the Delta people as Egyptology tells us? Or could it actually be a real physical symbol of this culture? A depiction of a large rock-cut statue dedicated to their king or maybe a god? Could this be the original Sphinx before the addition of masonry in the Old Kingdom turned it into a lion?
Wow.
I'll discuss all this and more in a future video.
Dang. That's interesting.
Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much. Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. Followers of Ancient Architects will know that the origins of the Sphinx has been a major focus in recent weeks. But one specific subject I've not looked into enough concerns the four legs of the Sphinx. All of them are totally covered with masonry, seemingly thick masonry, making them look bigger and larger than was ever originally intended. On old black and white photographs you can see the masonry falling off in patches, revealing even older masonry underneath. And so I wondered, is there even any bedrock at all? Are the legs completely constructed from masonry? To get to the bottom of the mystery, I needed to turn my attention to the Lacau archive of historical photographs, taken during the 1920s when Emil Baresi excavated the Sphinx, our only real opportunity to see the Sphinx at least partially masonry free. For some strange reason, he never released any reports on his excavations and restoration, and so we are left with a selection of photographs, as well as information from Selim Hassan, who wrote about the Sphinx a few years later, and also Mark Lehner when he wrote his dissertation in the 1980s. Each section of the body could have its own separate video, and maybe it will, but I really wanted to concern myself with the legs, because these seem to be the most heavily built up. To get the best understanding of the situation, aside from the photographs, the only real source of information is Mark Lehner's dissertation, which he finished in 1991, because he mapped the entire structure in incredible detail, taking photographs and describing each section. This work took place in the 1980s, when further restorations were taking place. Of the forepaws, he explains that in certain places, where the masonry cover of the paws has been removed, the veneer at the base of the paws is not very thick over the bedrock, and he states that the dimensions of the bedrock paws are probably not much less than when you take them into account with their masonry covering. So, straight away, he says what pictures confirm that there is bedrock beneath the paws of the Sphinx. He states that under the south forepaw, the bedrock surface of the elbow is fairly regular, but it has not been smoothed and it is stained a deep red. He believes it looks like the harder Member 1 limestone, which then recedes considerably when you go up and reach the bedrock of Member 2. A lot of masonry is added to make up the finished contour of this part of the statue. Further along the south paw, Lehner saw more Member 1 limestone bedrock close to the floor, just behind the outermost toe, rough textured and again stained deep red, or dappled with red powder and white mortar. There is also apparently rough, seemingly unfinished Member 1 bedrock behind the toes. It is not smoothed, but finished off to a fairly regular plane. On the inside of the south forepaw, Lehner noted the junction between Member 1 and Member 2 bedrock, as it displays the classic drastic weathering of the Sphinx enclosure, with the softer layer being recessed by 0.4 meters. He stated that the erosion happened before the masonry and packing stones were added. He notes that at a certain place towards the base of the paw, Member 2 rock was cut back to leave a ledge in the harder Member 1 stone, being 0.63 meters tall and 0.75 meters in width. The same ledge is 0.2 meters higher on the north forepaw due to the natural dip of the limestone. I assume that this ledge is what was built up with masonry to form the recessed area we see today. On the north forepaw, Lehner mentions a few outcrops of natural bedrock under the masonry. and, like the southpaw, he says it looks extremely rough, or that differential weathering of the bedding occurred before the ancient veneer was laid over it. There is also a hole on the top of the north forepaw, 2.8 metres east of where it joins to the chest, which was 0.9 metres in depth. The somewhat round and regular hole could have been forced through the masonry cover and into the bedrock, as some of the veneer is broken at the edges of the hole. But also, some of the ancient veneer stones at the edge of the hole have been laid perpendicular to the other courses of masonry, which makes it look like they were framing the hole. What could this hole have been used for? Did it have an ancient purpose? It is possible that the hole was cut during the original carving of the paw and then sealed by a masonry veneer, which was broken through in later times. On the north forepaw, where the veneer is removed on its eastern side, Lena saw older masonry underneath, but also hard crystalline bedrock, possibly member 1 with a rough red stained surface. In places, packing material builds up the paw on what looks like a shelf of member 1 bedrock. On the northern elbow, bedrock was exposed at a depth of 0.2 to 0.3 metres from the outer casing that reduces in thickness as you move up. The member 1 bedrock is extremely rough and pocketed. At places, Lena notes that the bedrock doesn't closely resemble the finished structure for the lower part on the western end of the paw, and this irregularity could be because it was roughed up artificially or was just weathered. So, in summary, Lena says that member 1 bedrock protrudes laterally from member 2 at points around the base. This is seen at both forepaws and the chest. At the south elbow, bedrock extends close to the outer baseline of the statue, which is formed by a masonry veneer up to a height of 1.5 metres. It then recedes considerably to the member 2 layers exposed higher. Packing material from later restoration defines the paw. On the inner sides of the forepaws, where the chapel is located, a ledge was formed, perhaps cut deliberately on the member 1 stratum, varying from 0.6 to 0.8 metres in height. Along the outer side of the north forepaw, the rough member 1 bedrock has been exposed to a height of 1.1 metres at the rear outer toe, and as a receding hump about 1 metre in height at the elbow. The contours of the statue were built up and filled out with packing and masonry due to the cutting back or weathering of the member 2 layers. Remember, the member 2 limestone is softer. Moving to the hindpaws, and there is a lot of stone packing material, but there is member 1 bedrock present. On the northern hindpaw, the vertical face of member 1 bedrock is fairly straight, but the surface is rough and pocketed, although it was once finely dressed. A number of claws are also crudely etched onto the bedrock. There is no member 2 limestone present, and the blocks to encase and fill out the northern hindpaw were apparently placed directly onto the member 1 limestone. The north hindpaw also contains 3 geological fissures, which have been filled in with masonry blocks, limestone chips, mortar, sandy clay and so on. The member 1 bedrock often appears irregular, bulbous and unfinished. The southern hindpaw looks to be almost completely built from the early phase of masonry added to the Sphinx. There is a small hump of member 1 bedrock, lower than what is seen on the northern paw, but this is due to the natural dip of the limestone beds. It could be that the soft member 2 limestone was all weathered away, or that it was cut back to build up the paw directly on the harder member 1 rock surface. So, in a nutshell, that's what Lena says in his dissertation on the Sphinx. He of course goes into far more detail, and for this video I've just outlined the main points. For a long time I have wondered what the extent of the bedrock was beneath the masonry veneers of the paws, and I've often wondered if there is any bedrock at all, especially after seeing this picture of the southern hindpaw. But as the pictures and Lena's description show, there certainly is bedrock underneath. By Lena's account, the bedrock paws appear to be just as weathered as the rest of the monument, and the weathering at the interface between member 1 and member 2 could well be as deep as what we see on the enclosure walls. As I can see, there are 2 possible explanations for the earliest phase of the Sphinx. Number 1, the pores could have been roughly cut on purpose because, like the pyramids of Egypt, maybe the Sphinx was always going to be cased in better quality limestone. Maybe this casing would give the statue its final shape. Therefore, the carving of the Sphinx could have been rough by design, because they planned to finish it with better stone. The second option is that the Sphinx was long weathered way before the first round of masonry was added in the Old Kingdom, and based on Lena's description of the bedrock under the pores, it appears that it must be option 2. This is confirmed by the fact the bedrock is weathered and eroded, and also the fact it is painted deep red. So, it does appear that the monument did originally have 4 legs before being covered in masonry, meaning it was always an animal sculpture of some kind. The bedrock inside the 4 legs shows clear signs of weathering. It is also irregular and looks rough, indicative of age-old wear and tear. Although the pores are covered with masonry, Lena says that the covering is relatively thin, and so the original bedrock pores, before the ancient weathering and erosion took place, were not so dissimilar proportionally than they are today. We can debate this, especially when we see how much masonry there is in certain places, but in other places, we can just about see in these old pictures that the veneer is clearly quite thin. It is quite hard to see in the images in this video, but I have studied them in quite some detail. There is substantial bedrock inside the pores. Which brings me back to this image, looking at the forepores from above. Now, is it just me, or do these have no real resemblance to the paws of a lion, or even a dog or jackal for that matter, or actually any kind of animal? In comparison, and maybe a poor comparison due to cultural differences, these monumental paws at Sigiriya in Sri Lanka are certainly more lion-like, but the Great Sphinx monument has front paws that look to be, well, more human-like. Maybe I'm seeing things, but the shape of these so-called paws does look like a pair of human hands in a gripping pose. I can see 4 fingers and a thumb on each hand. It seems to be only from this angle that such a comparison can be made, and it is far less conclusive on other photographs, maybe because of the addition of masonry. And although I'm not saying that these are certainly human hands, it does make me wonder how these 18th dynasty New Kingdom depictions of the Sphinx arose. The Sphinx was greatly restored in the 18th dynasty by Thutmose IV, who was famous for putting up the dream stealer between the paws of the monument. Now this is a Sphinx statue of Amenhotep III, son of Thutmose IV. This is a Sphinx depiction by the grandson of Thutmose IV, Akhenaten, son of Amenhotep III. And here is a Sphinx of the great-grandson of Thutmose IV, Tutankhamun. Why did they make their depictions of the Sphinx more human and less lion? Why do the forepaws of their Sphinxes have human arms and hands? Did the renovations of Thutmose IV reveal a secret on the Sphinx bedrock, one that was concealed by masonry with crude claws etched onto the front of the human fingers? As I said, this is just an idea, one that could never be proved either way, and I'm sure many people do disagree. It's just that this image, together with the various depictions of the Sphinx after the reign of Thutmose IV, got me thinking. If nothing else, it's something to bear in mind. I'll do a more detailed video of the condition of the body of the Sphinx itself, but one thing is for certain, there is sufficient weathered and eroded bedrock beneath the masonry on the paws to know that this monument did have an animal-like form before the first repair blocks were added. There is, as Mark Lehner himself says, a harder member 1 shelf on the lower body and paws of the Sphinx, because the softer member 2 rock above it has been substantially weathered. I do find it very interesting that the bedrock paws themselves were painted a deep red, indicating that before any masonry was added to the monument, the Sphinx was always a solar symbol, maybe even before the dynastic era, something which I'll be discussing in a future video as I continue to build my new hypothesis on the origins of the Sphinx. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.
Egypt, the richest source of archaeological treasures on the planet.
Oh, that's a fabulous one.
Beneath this desert landscape lie the secrets of this ancient civilization.
Wow. You see why the pharaohs chose this place.
Now, for a full season of excavations, our cameras have been given unprecedented access to follow teams on the front line of archaeology.
I'm driving so fast because I'm so excited.
Lost civilizations, mysterious sunken cities, and legendary Atlantis itself. Vanished beneath the waves.
There is a huge amount of unrecorded human history beneath the ocean surface that we don't know very much about at all.
Imagine if we could empty the oceans, letting the water drain away to reveal the secrets of the seafloor. Now we can. Using the latest underwater technology, piercing the deep oceans and turning accurate data into 3D images. Is this a huge underwater temple carved by a mysterious lost civilization?
一生マチュピチュの遺跡に似てるんだなということから海底に
Why are these perfectly circular stones lying at the bottom of a bay in the Aegean Sea?
There are shapes on the seabed that just don't make sense.
Are these just rocks or the remains of an ancient city?
Parts of this are just beginning to be revealed for the first time. Wow.
Academic investigations point to one place.
Sorry, I'm saying it's garbage. A bunch of rocks in the ocean floor. It's garbage. Man, I think I'm done though. I think I'm done, man. Thanks for being here, man. You're the man, dude. Here we come, young. Yeah, buddy. Thanks for being here, man. Thanks for being here, man. You're the man, dude.